Welcome back to the channel. Today's lesson is titled Rocking the Swing, and I've added the highlight of a 25% power boost, which is what I've experienced in trying to incorporate rocking the swing into my technique, and I think with a little practice you'll see the same sort of magnitude of benefits. So what is rocking the swing? Well, in a forehand and our backhand series, we've talked about three phases to the swing: the loading, the transition, and the unloading. Three phases. And last week we covered the middle phase, the transition phase, quite extensively. Today we're going to work on the loading and unloading phases a little bit more. So the loading phase is essentially on the backhand, a reorientation, a shifting of the weight and pressure into our trail side, especially our trail leg, so we can almost pick up this front leg. And there's a twisting and torsion in our rear hip as we externally rotate our hip that store up power so we can unload that later on. And there's also we talked about a tilting of the front shoulder down and a general spiraling up of all the muscles in our pelvis and in our chest. So one way of improving your loading phase is to think about this as a rocking up phase. And so our trail side hip, pelvis, is going to rock up just as we turn, and we can accentuate that with more technique that we're talking about. And our shoulders are kind of in this downward angle from the front. So we're sort of rocking up with our trail side shoulder as well. And then, of course, we talked about last week, there is a sinking phase in the transition where we, after from rock up and a weight on the back, we transition out to the side here. Our pelvis goes down, our weight goes into our front leg, and that's the transition move. And we recenter in that. And that's sort of the rocking down phase. And then finally, once we get into the slot and we've transferred our weight in the transition and our pressure and our momentum, then we can start to swing. The first part of the swing, more rotational, and then as we move through, there's a rising. And that's the last rock up phase of this rocking idea. And by focusing on the up and down and the twisting in that motion, I think we can dramatically increase our power in our swing. It's what I felt, and I think you'll feel it as well. To better understand this rocking the swing concept, we have to look into our bodily structure, and the slide in the background is one I've shown you before, at least part of it, which is that our body is composed of all these muscles and systems that crisscross our spine in diagonal kind of attachment. And this provides the basis for our spiraling action with our body and our rotation. But what we haven't covered too much, and we'll cover today, is more of what's happening in the lower swing center of the pelvis. And you can see in the diagram here that the lower part of the pelvis has got a bowl shape to it. So it starts low, and then at the edges of our pelvis, it shapes up just like a bowl. And this is an understanding of that. It's going to give us a lot of insight into how we should move. Basically, this pelvis is always rocking when we're moving. So as we turn left here, and I'm just turning on flat ground horizontally, you can see that the left side of this alignment stick goes up a couple inches. And that's just the natural process of turning and the bowl shape of our pelvis. You can't really see it that well on video per se, but it happens. So this, on the backhand, turning now to the left up here, there are ways that we can increase that amount of turn and amount of drop that we get in the sinking and rising motion of the swing. And we've talked about a few times already how we have these two swing centers in the core of our body, one in our middle of our chest and one in the middle of our pelvis. And that we are rotating and spiraling around these centers in a good high-level swing. And we really can think of this bowl shape of our pelvis and the way it moves as a sort of rocking horse, where it has two sides up and a lower part in the middle. However, we don't want to think of this as sort of a one-dimensional linear rocking horse. So in other words, on the backhand, we don't want to be thinking up and down in a straight linear manner. This is not a powerful way to move. Instead, we always have a forward tilt in athletics, and we have a side tilt, left-right side tilt. So on the backhand, we have a right side tilt in the take back, and on the release and unloading, left side bend. So there's a lateral tilt and a forward tilt. And we spiral around this axis in this manner that we've talked about. So you can see in the next slide that we should be thinking about this rocking horse concept not as a linear up and down to the target straight ahead way I'm doing it now, but in a spiraling action where we're spiraling the hips and the chest in a sinking and a rising action. That's the correct way to think about the rocking horse in the modern game. Now, to quickly just cover the three phases again from high level using Gasquet as our model here. So we've skipped some beginning stages where there's a reorientation. If the camera's the target, I'm reorienting 45, 60 degrees left of the target with my body, my legs, my shoulders out this way. That gives me the room for the take back that I need and the width and depth that I need. So we start in the first picture of the rock back with Gasquet, basically rocking back on his back foot, loading this back hip, arms up, spiraling up in this classic position that he has. So from a ready position, he's gone and he's rocked up. The pelvis has swung up here in this rocking horse fashion, and he's lowered his right leg a little to get more of that rock up angle that he wants to then go into the second phase, which is the rock down and forward. So we're not turning towards the target yet. We're just transitioning out here to the left, as we talked about in last week's lesson, the backhand Bermuda triangle. So we're sinking and loading the pelvis and getting our weight into our front side, but we're sinking even further than we did when we first started our take back. So that's the rock down and forward phase, and our arms drop into the slot. And then the rock up and to the right, well, initially we're going out to the left with our arm like we talked about last week with the runway portion of the stroke before we've turned our hips and pelvis. But at some point our hips and pelvis are going to rotate, pivot towards the target, and our arms will start to extend and rotate up. And we talked in a previous lesson that we don't want to have this rising and straightening too soon in this process. That will ruin the swing because we won't be able to rotate once we straighten up. So we want to stay down and rotating till we're getting through contact, and then there's going to be a rise, as you see with Gasquet here. And essentially, if I'm starting out to the left and starting swing left, when I turn the corner of the swing, then my racket is going right of the target. So I'm just going just like it, very simple, but it's often missed as a concept. So that's the big picture of rocking the swing. We're going to go into a lot more detail and outline all the benefits that this is going to bring to your swing. So let's get started, but let me play Gasquet a few times through at the beginning so you can see what this is all about. Let's get started. So in phase one of the rock up phase of our swing, you can see Gasquet he's reorienting out to the left of the target quite a bit, 45, 60 degrees, sometimes 90 degrees. It depends on how much time they have and what kind of ball they're hitting. The very first thing that you see from Gasquet from the ready position is he creates a box-like arm structure holding the racket. So he's bringing it out, tipping the racket handle forward a bit. He's raising it up. And so it's like he's holding a ball here. And we'll talk about the reasons for that, but it's basically a container for energy that he's going to be moving around his body. And then he reorients 45, 60 degrees, sometimes 90 degrees left of the target. And he starts to spiral up by lowering his front leg a little bit and dipping. He's spiraling the pelvis up, and then his muscles and shoulders spiraling up with the front shoulder dipping. So, and then he's raising his arms in a spiral coil. All of that in the rocking up phase, and of course transferring pressure and weight into his trail leg so he could pick up this front leg if he needed to. And I want to pause here to highlight why I think traditional tennis's emphasis and use of this term unit turn is so mechanical and so lame. So the unit turn is basically just the idea that the hips and the shoulders turn back as one, which does happen at the very beginning of the movement process, just like it does in golf, where the first 2 or 3 feet, the shoulders and hips are moving in unison backwards. But the most important parts of the whole take-back process are not adequately covered at all in that concept, because what we really want is not a unit turn, but we want loading. And in order to get loading, we need to have separation between the upper body and the lower body. So we don't want things to turn back as one piece and then come through as one piece. That's going to give us nothing, no power at all. So the emphasis should be on loading if you're a teacher out there or a player, not on a unit turn. Unit turn is the beginning part, but from here on in, all the way to the back, we're trying to create separation and stretch between our upper body and our lower body, and between the parts of our pelvis should also be starting to be loaded, ready to do something with it. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of this the idea of this box-like arm structure that Gasquet and all great athletes use at the beginning of their backhand. And this is exactly the opposite of what almost all recreational players do on the backhand, which is immediately split their hands. So there's no energy contained in the movement that follows. It's just all arms, and we've lost the body right away. So we want this arm structure, which is again used in all sports. So you can see the golf and in baseball where they do grasp the bat or the club with two hands, that there's this triangle form in golf, for example, from the shoulders to the hands. And that triangle shape changes as you get up to the top, and the arms are compressed more around the upper body. But then as we get into the delivery part, we get right back to the delivery of this triangle to the ball. And this helps us coordinate in time the release of energy as we swing. Baseball the same way. We have this box-like structure up here, and yes, there's a tighter turn here, but then as we extend out, this box-like structure helps the body coordinate the timing and release of the bat through the ball. So we want to think from a ready position of creating our own version of this box-like structure, many different variations of it, but it's all of one idea, is that we have a container for potential energy at the beginning. There's nothing here at the beginning phase, but as we coil back and spiral up, we're gathering energy into this area contained by our arms, as you can see in the diagram in the slide. That's all energy that's going to go rocking down through our pelvis and then rocketing back up through our torso and out to our arm and eventually out to the racket. So we want to be cognizant of this idea of building energy within this box structure and carrying that box structure as long as we can. And with the one-hander, we're releasing that energy before the release of the stroke. With two-handed backhand, we have this rotation all the way through, and I think this is the chief reason why the two-hander dominates the professional tour now. There's only one player on the women's tour in the top 100 that uses a single-handed backhand, and only 10 or 11 players on the men's side, and some of those are retiring, that use a one-handed. The rest use two-handed backhand. Why? Because I think this two hands connects the body all the way through the rotation, through contact, and it generally makes it easier for players because then they can let their body time the release of this path and the release of the timing of squaring the contact, and they don't have to rely on an unreliable single arm to do that. Now, obviously, looking at Wawrinka and Gasquet, you can have a great one-handed backhand, and that's what most of our lesson is about. So we don't have to, sacrifice very much at all with a one-handed if we have the right technique. But part of that technique is learning this idea of rocking the body and rocking the swing. In phase two of the swing, the rocking down and forward, we start from our take back. You can see Gasquet's up here, but then as he starts to move into the slot and down, sinks down, there's a bunch of things happening. So he's extending his arms and pulling back with his shoulder as he's sinking. So he's creating more stretch between his upper body and his lower body. So he's increasing the potential release of energy in doing that. And he's dropping and winding the arm back in the master move that we talked about. The twisting and loading of the arm and the racket down in the slotted position. That also, of course, will be potential energy to be released. And in terms of the legs, our pelvis is going to be dropping and recentering, and there's momentum shifted into our front leg. And that's going to be the basis for our next phase of the swing, which is the rock up. But before we get to that rock up phase, I want to go through this video of Gasquet and Wawrinka's backhand from the posterior point of view, and just so you can really see how the pelvis particularly is rocking down, transitioning, and then rocking up for both of these great players, and really try to clarify that in your mind. Let me play that. We were going to focus our analysis of the rocking swing on the lower half of Gasquet's body here. You can see his box-like arm structure from the ready position as he starts his rock back phase. At the top of his rock back phase, you can see his weight is transferred back to his trail leg, and his pelvis, torso, and arms have spiraled up. and he's basically balancing his entire weight on his trail leg. We now see the start of the second transition phase of the swing, the rocking down and forward phase. And I've drawn a box around his midsection, starting right at the line of his shirt on the lead side, so you can see how much he sinks from the first rock up phase. So in the second rock down and forward stage, you can see how much his body and pelvis has lowered. You can see the pressure going into his lead leg, and you can see his torso recentering over his pelvis, and now his pelvis and shoulders are level. Now at the start of the third unloading phase, or rock up and right phase, I moved the box down to mark the lowest point he has sunk in the second sinking phase, so you can clearly see how much he rises in the coming phase. And there you see he stays down and rotates through contact, but just as he's passing through contact, his legs are straightening and his pelvis has rotated, with his lead leg pushing back, creating more rising in the body. And as he finishes, his midsection has risen considerably from its lowest point. There's tremendous power being stored in this rising, sinking, rising, rocking rhythm of his swing. We'll see very much the same rocking rhythm in Wawrinka's backhand here. And since we just did the analysis on Gasquet's backhand, I won't repeat myself on this Wawrinka video analysis, except at this one point of the step, which I call a power boost. As I've said several times, we can't always get fully loaded in our swinging process, as our opponent doesn't allow us that time. But our goal should be always to get as loaded as possible. And when we have more time, take the offensive and, increase our loading. The power boost step is a key way that the best players in the world on the one-handed backhand increase their loading and power. In the transition state of rock down and forward, the direction isn't just forward with the lead foot, but as you can see, it's turned at an angle to the target. And this way of placing the foot increases the stretch and load in the pelvis, like pulling back the arm of a spring to increase the tension and increase the release of energy when the spring, or in this case, the pelvis, snaps around in rotation to the target. This move is a 5 to 10% power boost alone, and should be a technique you should learn as you advance your one-handed backhand technique. In the notes section below my video, I'll provide a link to Gasquet giving his own lesson on his backhand technique, and the very first thing that he discusses is this rock down and forward move with his legs and pelvis. Now in the first part of phase 3, rocking down and left portion of it, again, we're reoriented. We've rocked down in transition, dropped into the slot. And now we're driving out to the left here with our body that we talked about last week with the Bermuda backhand. And the racket handle is oriented left as we pull out of the sheath of the sword out this way. And we're at this stage not doing a lot of pivoting and coiling of our hips or uncoiling of our hips and body. We're driving out here to the left in a sort of linear path initially, just for a few fractions of a second, but it's important. They're building momentum, letting the racket head trail and maybe even lower in this part with the ulnar deviation that we talked about. So dropping this racket head will give us the ability to generate more topspin. In the second part of the rock up part of this process, of course, is that now that we've started the runway out here to the left, and now we've reached the point where our hips are starting to pivot towards the target, and then followed by the chest, that's going to shoot the racket out on the swing circle. And then up into this spiraling right fashion across the body for a right-handed player hitting a backhand. So that's the spiral up and to the right. And in this process of spiraling up and to the right, we have two major power sources. we have the rising of the pelvis through contact, and then the rising of the torso to some degree as we pass through contact. So there's a rising force factor as we move through contact. But equally important, if not more important, that's lost by most, is that there's a rotational pivot through the pelvis and then through the chest as we swing around the swing circle that provides the power, major power source for the rotation. So we go get power from the rising and power from the rotation, and we have to incorporate both of these in our technique. So going back to the high level of rocking the swing, 3 phases, right? There's the reorientation and rocking up, loading into the trail. There's the transition down, out to the left, into the slot, and then there is the eventual turning the racket up and right as our body rises and rotates up and right. Now, I've used this slide before, but I want to come back to it because I think it's important. Is, you know, we already have these laments that the one-handed backhand is going away from the game. Only a handful of players still use it, and people are lamenting already about this beautiful stroke, which I think is the most beautiful stroke in tennis, the one-handed backhand. It seems to be disappearing from the game. And next to Gasquet here, I have the ancient statue of the discus thrower, created around 450 BC during the first era of the Olympic Games in Greece. And this was the most famous statue of ancient times. And why was it so famous? Well, it basically represents the ideal of the athletic form, where we have rotation, harmony, and power all encompassed in this form. And that's why I would also say the one-handed backhand is also incorporates those same principles. And that's why we talk about it all the time as being so beautiful. So from a technical point of view, perhaps more people talk about beauty as being defined as form following function. And so yeah, I would say, yes, that's true, that this spiraling swing action of our body follows the spiral unwinding of our body. So the swing follows the spiral unwinding of the body, but it also shows us how efficient and powerful the interkinetic chain sequence of energy passing from one segment of our body to another can work when done right. And there's a beauty in that as well. So let me play Gasquet with all the bells and whistles turned on a couple more times for you before we go to our deliberate practice section or how-to section of the lesson. Now, before we go on to our how-to or deliberate practice section of the lesson, I just want to say a few more words about deliberate practice. And I know for a lot of you, this is the point where I lose you in the video and you check out of my lesson video saying that, well, I got the movement map and the sexy videos, hopefully they're sexy. And I got the idea, so let me just move on. So I want to try to say a few more things to encourage you, not just to watch my deliberate practice videos. That doesn't really matter. It's that you sort of understand the bigger concept and that you somehow apply it in your tennis development. So in deliberate practice, there's certain principles that scientists have learned over many studies in all domains about what's the best and fastest way to learn. And that's what I want you to sort of tune in here before you leave me. So they talk about one of the first things to do is to break complex movements into pieces or chunks. Because movement is very complex. There's, hundreds of individual moves, even in a 1-second tennis backhand swing. Secondly, that you should practice each piece in slow motion to learn the feels and principles in this movement. So they always say, the best practice is to do something correctly slowly, because you're trying to overcome past ways that you do things, and you really have to feel your way into a new movement. Third in the sequence is you start adding these pieces back together and practicing those in slow motion. So we're reassembling the pieces that we've broken apart. But yes, at the beginning we have to do that slowly, and then finally we can add speed and complexity to the overall movement. And that's the basic pattern of deliberate practice. I think I've told you before that I subscribe to some 60 of the best YouTube instructional sites on throwing and swinging that I could find. And it takes many years of watching these channels before you sort of get the summary wisdom of the teacher. But usually the summary wisdom comes out that if you just practice deliberately, for a short time every day, you will make a dramatic transformation in your game. As little as 15 minutes a day, perhaps. And this is what Peter Cowan says, and I'll provide the link in the notes, where he says he's arguably the world's greatest golf instructor. He says if you practice these things 15 minutes a day, it will transform your game. And a lot of instructors in a lot of domains feel the same way. Now, does it have to be 15 minutes? No. Doing anything 15 minutes a day in a focused way is difficult. We realize that. So maybe it's 5 minutes a day, 3 or 4 times a week. But just pick out 1 or 2 of the individual pieces that I've talked about today, whether it's the arm form structure of Gasquet, whether it's the pullback when you reach the top, whether it's the master move with the arm, whether it's the master power boost step. There's many little individual pieces that you can focus on, and just do it in your living room, do it in your backyard, 5 minutes a day. Don't have to be hitting balls. Just with focused shadow swings and movement, you can make a big improvement. So the last part of this is sort of a confession. I call it the confessions of a tennis concept junkie. So I was one for many years. And so I would go looking for the latest breakthrough concept among all the teachers out there, and I'm sure you may have done the same thing. And thinking that, okay, I just need that one piece, I figured that out, I'm gonna make a much better improvement in my game, in my imagination once I've learned that. But it never really panned out that way. There's always a game, there's always a hitting practice with your friends, there's always a USTA match coming up that distracts you from focusing on those breakthrough pieces. So I'm encouraging you not to make the same mistake I did and keep going down this path of tennis concept junkie. Is you have to slow down, you have to break things into pieces. I film hundreds if not thousands of days of my practice, and the people who usually see me filming myself out on the public courts or at the club here, they oftentimes will come up and say, something alluding to the fact that you like to video and like to watch yourself like I like to watch selfies of myself. And I always tell them it's just the opposite. It's just every time I review my own videos of practice, I'm disappointed every time, thousands of times. Because in my imagination, I thought I've gotten the technique down further. And then when I see the real thing, I realize, I still have ways to go. That's disappointing. But after a time, you learn to deal with that, and you become a little bit more patient with yourself. And you realize that, well, to be blunt about it, your body is like a stubborn donkey. You know, it wants to hold on to everything it's done in the past. It doesn't want to move in new ways. It doesn't want to learn new things. And you have to be patient with this donkey. But if you are, and you come each day with a new game plan based upon what you've seen in the past, you can make that donkey perform wonders after a while. You'd be surprised. And now I often get people coming up at the parks usually, and they'll say something complimentary, you know, like your stroke's looking good, or, you know, how do you hit it so hard, or something like that. Now, it's nice to get praise. Everybody likes praise. Everybody likes to be admired. But what I would say to you is that, you know, underneath that social interaction, there's kind of a deeper level of satisfaction that you can get if you've actually made that improvement. You've done it yourself. And, you know, that kind of satisfaction can keep you going a long time and take you to much higher heights than just someone giving you a random compliment. So we are in the deliberate practice how-to section of the lesson. Hopefully I've encouraged you to stick around and seize this. And this will be yet another example of all those principles I talked about, of breaking it down and reassembling the pieces. But before we get to that, we have to read you my precaution about taking injury prevention seriously. Now, don't do these exercises if you are sore or injured. Stop the exercises immediately if you feel pain or soreness. Do all the exercises in athletic posture to enable a healthy, you know, rotation and action. And fourth, start the exercise program slowly, checking for injury or soreness the next day before increasing your speed and activity. The first exercise I want you to do today is starting with, again, breaking our complex movement into the three phases. The first phase being the rock up phase, using Gasquet as sort of our model. And, you know, I want you to, again, as we always do, and should, start from a ready position where we're tilted forward, you know, 10 or 20 degrees. Our lower back is level. The top of our back can be slightly hunched, that's okay, but the lower back should be level. That we have our pressure and weight in the balls of our feet so that we can bounce in a balanced way between them. And our butt's down a little bit, and we can feel some pressure in our thighs and in our butt holding us up in a balanced way. So from this ready position, racket maybe down here lower, I want you just to make the box-like structure that Gasquet does, this container structure that we've talked about. So it's, you know, a very small move really, but it's lifting the racket, it's pushing the racket handle out towards the target like this, and it's raising up and extending the arms from the body. So it's like this, just like this. So 10 reps, slow motion of the Gasquet box structure. The next phase is the further rock back and take back, mostly focused on the arms for now. We've got our box-like structure coming up in nice form. And I want you to pivot and turn, and I want you to reorient with one step out 60 degrees to the left of the target. So we're turning and lifting the racket up, not too high right at the moment, just keeping the box-like structure up with the tip of the racket slightly behind us and over our head. So 10 reps, slow motion reps of the move to there. I'll pause the video. Next piece or chunk is the final stage of the rock back for the phase 1 Gasquet. So from the ready position, athletic, got the box-like structure, we're taking it back and pivoting, and then we're gonna extend our arms and have some pressure going into our trail leg so that we can pick up our front leg, and a little bit of a pullback and extension of the arms up, like you see in the Gasquet picture. I'll pause the video for 10 slow motion reps of that. In the next sequence of the deliberate practice, we've broken things into the pieces. Now we're gonna do the reassembly. So we've had the 3 pieces in the rock back. Now I want you to do all 3 pieces in slow motion. So we have the initial lifting of the racket, the pivot and turn, and then the weight and pressure into our trail side, shoulder level down, angle down. Work out the kinks, pause between the reps, 10 slow motion reps of rock back in slow motion. Again, after we reassemble the pieces, we add speed and complexity. So I want you to do 10 medium speed reps of that whole sequence up to rock back, and then 10 fast reps. Again, pausing between the reps, feeling and seeing, sensing what you may have done wrong or you could have done better, and redoing it each time. And so by the 9th or 10th repetition, you really feel like you've smoothed out some kinks. So I'll pause the video for 10 medium and fast reps of phase 1. So we're on to the second phase, which is the rock down and forward phase. So we're already up here. We're already oriented out to the left. We're starting to pull back, and then we're gonna sink, and our body and our feet are gonna point out in the 60-degree area. And we're just gonna focus on sinking and recentering our torso over our pelvis and getting some real pressure throughout our pelvis. So it's mostly a body motion now. We're not going to add the arms in a second. So pause the video for 10 slow motion reps of that. The second piece of the rock down, of course, is the arms have to come down and drop into the slot. So from up here, you're going to do your sinking and forward push into your lead leg, but then you're also going to be, as your front leg presses into the ground and establishes stability, I want you to have that pullback of the arm structure. So you're getting deeper and wider back here like I'm showing you, and you're winding the arm back in the master move like we discussed. So 10 slow motion reps of the sink and stretch with the arms. And the last piece or chunk of the rock down and forward, I want you to practice the power boost step, which again, you'll see it in the picture in the background, is that as we move forward out 60 degrees and plant our weight, instead of planting our foot straight 60 degrees, we're angling our front foot towards the target a little, like this, so that we're creating a stretch in our pelvis as we sink and settle into this. So now we're giving an extra load to our pelvic area that we're going to be able to have more energy to fire and pivot out of when we do fire and pivot. So 10 slow motion reps from up here all the way back, sinking, taking the step, lowering the hands, 10 reps. I'll pause the video. Now in the third major chunk, which is the rock up and around phase. So we've completed our step and maybe even giving it a little power boost step by turning and pivoting our foot. But now I want you to start out coming from the slot, but I don't want you to pivot around your body instantly like we've warned you about. I want you to continue the momentum out to the left for a moment. You know, drawing the racket out of the sheath, letting the handle go out here to the left for a moment. And we're not pivoting hard, but there might be, if you have your power boost step, there might be a slight turn of the pivot pelvis in that, but we don't want to accentuate that. We're just loading and slowly unloading at this point, gathering momentum as we move up and through the swing. So 10 slow motion of the runway portion of the rock up. Pause the video. Now from the lowest sink point in the swing, phase 2, we're in our third phase of rocking up, and we've had the runway out here, but now I want you to practice this takeoff with this more accentuated release of the pelvis with your power step, and then followed by the release and rotation up of the chest, then followed by the arm in this slinging fashion. And we're just gonna try to let our body work and let our arms be relatively passive and let the body drive our arm swing around. Pause for 10 slow motion reps of that. So the next exercise, of course, is to reassemble the pieces in phase 3, which is the runway and the takeoff. And you can let your arms extend in the finish in this spiraling fashion. Make sure that you're not standing up too soon or straightening up too soon, that you keep rotating all the way through contact. And then as you get into contact, you can start to extend and push back with this lead leg and rise up. So 10 slow motion of phase 3. I'll pause the video. So now that we've practiced all the individual pieces of phase 1, 2, and 3 of the rocking swing, now's the time to reassemble all 3 pieces in slow motion. So I'm going to pause the video for you to go from the ready position and go through all 3 phases in slow motion. Try to feel each move, make sure that you're incorporating most of the things that we've talked about as best as you can, checking to see and improving with each rep. We'll pause the video. And now we're going to add more speed and complexity by having you do it. This all 3 phases in medium speed and then 10 in as fast as you can do it. And that should be somewhere around 1 second or a little bit more. If you want to time yourself with a camera, you can do that. But each time, each rep, we're reflecting back on the last rep. So we're not just doing 10 in a row as fast as we can to get it out of the way. No, that's not the way. We're thinking and reflecting of what we've just done and try to improve it each time. So 10 medium and fast of the whole rocking swing. We'll pause the video. So that's the end of our deliberate practice section of the lesson, and really the end of the lesson. And for those that are just new to these movements and this technique, I would say it would probably be best for you to spend the next couple of weeks going through all these different phases, 5, 10, 15 minutes a day, best you can, and getting it down more and more, and so it becomes just an automatic, unconscious sort of action at the end of the day. And for those of you who feel more comfortable and you progress so that you feel more comfortable, then yes, for certainly take it out on the court, but I would say start out with hitting the balls fed to you slowly without a lot of movement, because you're focusing on your swing, not on your movement. And that's the end of our rocking the swing lesson. And I want to leave you today with sort of keeping your eyes focused on the prize, which is developing a higher level swing, and encouraging you to try to incorporate some of the beauty of Gasquet's backhand technique into your technique. Now, one of Gasquet, or one of his characters, once said, "Beauty will save the world." Well, having been around in the world quite a long time now, I might say, well, maybe not. Maybe it won't save the entire world. But I will say that incorporating some of the beauty of Gasquet's backhand technique into your own swing, that can change the way you think and feel about your game. And if you stick with it long enough, you really could say that it saved your game, and I hope it will.